It was supposed to be just another normal day at the store. Customers came in and out, shopping for their daily needs, while employees bustled around, stocking shelves, handling registers, and keeping things clean. Among them was Daniel, a janitor, who had worked at the store for years. He wasn't the kind of man who stood out. He wasn't flashy, and he didn't have a high-ranking title, but he took pride in his work. Every morning, he arrived early, making sure the floors were spotless. Before the first customer walked in, he never complained, never caused trouble. He just did his job. But that day, everything changed. It happened in an instant. Daniel was mopping near the glassware section when a customer accidentally knocked a cup off the shelf. As Daniel turned to move out of the way, his foot slipped slightly on the damp floor, and before he could react, his elbow bumped into another glass cup on the display. It fell. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the store, sharp and unmistakable. Heads turned. Customers glanced over, some out of curiosity, others out of habit. Accidents happened all the time. It was just a cup, after all. But the moment Daniel looked up, he saw someone storming toward him with a furious expression. Mr. Peterson, the store manager. Mr. Peterson was known for being strict. He walked with an air of authority, his polished shoes clicking against the floor as if to announce his presence before he even spoke. He didn't like mistakes, and he certainly didn't like them happening on his watch. Unbelievable, Mr. Peterson muttered under his breath, shaking his head as he approached. Then, in a loud, cutting voice, he barked, "Daniel, what do you think you're doing?" Daniel straightened up, swallowing hard. I'm sorry, sir. It was an accident. The customer... I don't want to hear excuses. Mr. Peterson interrupted, his voice growing louder. Do you even realize how careless this looks? This store isn't a playground. You're here to work, not to break things. A few customers had stopped nearby, pretending to browse, but clearly listening. Some employees looked on from a distance, their expressions a mix of sympathy and fear. No one wanted to be on the receiving end of Mr. Peterson's wrath. Daniel lowered his gaze, his face burning with embarrassment. "I'll clean it up right away," he said quietly. "You should. And consider yourself lucky. I don't dock this from your paycheck." Mr. Peterson sneered. Then with a final shake of his head, he turned and walked away, leaving Daniel standing there, humiliated. For the rest of the shift, Daniel worked in silence. No one said much to him. A few employees gave him a sympathetic look, but no one dared to stand up for him. After all, Mr. Peterson was the boss. What could they do? But what no one knew, what even Daniel himself didn't realize, was that this small moment, this one act of public humiliation, had set something in motion, and 5 days later, everything would change. At first, it seemed like just another work week. Employees showed up, went through the motions, and tried to stay on Mr. Peterson's good side. Daniel, still shaken from the incident, kept his head down and did his job like always. But there was a shift in the air, something subtle yet undeniable. Then, on the 5th day, something happened, something that no one saw coming. And when it did, Mr. Peterson would wish he had chosen his words more carefully. The days after the incident felt longer than usual for Daniel. The humiliation from that moment stuck with him like a shadow he couldn't shake off. Every time he walked past the glassware section, he felt the weight of it all over again. The way Mr. Peterson had shouted at him in front of everyone. The way customers had watched but said nothing. It wasn't just about the broken cup. It was about how easily he had been dismissed, like he didn't matter. The other employees had seen it too, but no one spoke about it. That was how things worked around here. Mr. Peterson was in charge, and no one wanted to be his next target. He had a reputation for being tough, for running the store with strict rules, and for making sure everyone knew their place. He wasn't the kind of boss who gave second chances or offered words of encouragement. He believed that fear kept people in line, and for the most part, it did. But something was different this time. Employees whispered when they thought no one was listening. Customers who had witnessed the scene mentioned it to others, and Daniel, though quiet as always, carried himself just a little differently. There was something in his eyes, not anger, not defiance, but something that hadn't been there before. 5 days passed. That morning, the store opened like usual. The usual. Customers came in, carts rattling against the tile floors. The usual workers clocked in, putting on their name tags and forcing polite smiles. And Mr. Peterson, he was in his office, sitting behind his desk, unaware that his day was about to take a turn he never expected. It started small. A customer at the register asked to speak with the manager. The cashier, a young woman named Lisa, hesitated before paging Mr. Peterson over the intercom. He sighed, annoyed, and got up from his chair, straightening his tie as he walked toward the front of the store. "Yes, what seems to be the issue?" he asked with his usual sharp tone. The customer, an older man with silver hair and kind eyes, glanced at him and said, "Oh, no issue. I just wanted to ask about an employee here. A janitor named Daniel." Mr. Peterson frowned. "What about him?" The man smiled. "I was here a few days ago when you addressed him about the broken cup. I just wanted to know if he's still working here." "Of course he is," Mr. Peterson replied quickly, growing impatient. "Why?" The man nodded thoughtfully. "Good. I just wanted to make sure you hadn't let go of one of the hardest workers in this place." Mr. Peterson's expression tightened. "This store runs on discipline," he said. "Mistakes have consequences." The man held his gaze for a moment before simply saying, "Yes, they do." Then, without another word, he gathered his bags and walked out. It wasn't the last time someone brought it up. Throughout the day, customers asked about Daniel. A woman in the bakery section mentioned how she'd always seen him working hard, keeping the floors clean, helping elderly shoppers reach for items. Another customer, a mother with a toddler, said he had once helped her when her child spilled a drink, cleaning it up without a single complaint. More and more people spoke up, and each time, Mr. Peterson grew more irritated. Why were they suddenly so interested in a janitor? Then came the employees. Lisa, the cashier, was the first to say something. During a break, she casually mentioned, "You know, Daniel's been here longer than most of us. He's probably the only one who never complains, never asks for anything." A stock boy named Kevin nodded. "Yeah, he's always covering extra shifts when someone calls out. He doesn't even say no." A few others chimed in. Slowly, a realization spread through the store. Daniel wasn't just another worker. He was the backbone of the place, the kind of employee who never asked for recognition but deserved it more than anyone. By lunchtime, even the assistant manager had taken notice. "Something's going on," she told Mr. Peterson in a hushed tone in the office. "Everyone's talking about Daniel today." Mr. Peterson scoffed. "So what? People talk." "It's not just talk," she said carefully. "It's different this time." And it was, because just then, something else happened. The store doors opened and in walked a man in a suit. He carried himself with quiet authority. And when he reached the customer service desk, he asked for the store manager. Mr. Peterson straightened up when he saw him. He knew that face. Everyone in the company did. It was Mr. Lawson, the district supervisor. A visit from him was never random. "Good afternoon, sir," Mr. Peterson said quickly, putting on his best professional voice. "What brings you in today?" Mr. Lawson looked around the store, then back at Mr. Peterson. "I've been hearing a lot about one of your employees," he said. "A janitor named Daniel." Mr. Peterson's stomach dropped. "Daniel? Again?" He forced a tight smile. "Yes, he's been with us for a while." "I'd like to speak with him," Mr. Lawson said. There was no refusing, no way to talk around it. So Mr. Peterson nodded stiffly and paged Daniel over the intercom. Within minutes, Daniel appeared, wiping his hands on his uniform. His expression was calm, but there was something in his eyes, something that hadn't been there before. Confidence. "Daniel." Mr. Lawson greeted him warmly. "I've heard quite a bit about you today." Daniel blinked, clearly surprised. "You have?" Mr. Lawson nodded. "I have. Customers, employees. They all seem to have the same thing to say, that you're one of the hardest workers here, that you go above and beyond." Daniel glanced around, noticing the way people were watching. Some were smiling, some looked hopeful. "And I believe good work should be recognized," Mr. Lawson continued. "So I'd like to offer you a promotion. We have a supervisor position open at another location, and I think you'd be a perfect fit." Silence. For the first time, Mr. Peterson had nothing to say, and Daniel, he stood there, taking it all in. 5 days ago, he had been humiliated in front of everyone, and now, in the very same store, he was being offered something he never expected. But what would he say? And more importantly, what would Mr. Peterson do now? For a moment, the store felt frozen in time. Employees had stopped what they were doing, customers lingered nearby, and everyone was waiting for Daniel's response. Even Mr. Peterson, who had spent years barking orders and running the store with an iron fist, stood stiffly, unable to hide the tension in his face. Daniel, still processing Mr. Lawson's words, felt a strange mix of emotions: shock, gratitude, and something else, something he hadn't felt in a long time: respect. He had spent years working in this store, quietly doing his job, never asking for anything. And yet, in just 5 days, everything had changed. Not because he spoke up, but because people had spoken for him, customers, co-workers, even the assistant manager. They had all noticed him, seen his hard work, and made sure he was recognized. He looked at Mr. Lawson. "A supervisor position," he repeated, as if making sure he heard correctly. Mr. Lawson nodded. "Yes. You've built a reputation as someone reliable, hardworking, and dedicated. We need more people like you leading our stores." Daniel let those words sink in. All this time, he had thought no one noticed him, but they had. He glanced at Mr. Peterson. The manager's face was tight, with forced composure, but his eyes told another story, one of disbelief, frustration, maybe even regret. Daniel knew what this meant. If he accepted, he'd be leaving this store, leaving behind the daily grind, the background role he had played for so long. But was that a bad thing? No. For the first time in years, he had a choice. A slow, steady smile spread across Daniel's face. "I'd be honored," he said. A quiet murmur rippled through the store, a mix of excitement and approval. Lisa, the cashier, grinned. Kevin, the stock boy, gave him a small thumbs up. Even the assistant manager, who had spent years under Mr. Peterson's rule, looked relieved. Mr. Lawson smiled. "Great, we'll go over the details soon. But for now, congratulations." He extended his hand. Daniel shook it firmly. As Mr. Lawson turned to leave, employees slowly went back to work, though the energy in the store had completely shifted. There was a quiet buzz in the air, as if something had finally changed for the better. Mr. Peterson, still standing in place, finally let out a breath. He turned to Daniel, his jaw tight. "Looks like you got what you wanted," he said, his voice low. Daniel met his gaze, calm but unwavering. "I never wanted anything but respect," he replied. For once, Mr. Peterson had nothing to say. The rest of Daniel's shift went by like a blur. Customers congratulated him. Co-workers patted him on the back, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like more than just the janitor. He felt seen. By the time he clocked out, the sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the parking lot. He stood by his car for a moment, taking in everything that had happened. 5 days ago, he had been humiliated in front of everyone. He had felt small, invisible. But now he was walking away with his head held high. He opened his car door, took one last look at the store that had been his world for so long, and then stepped inside. As he drove off, he didn't just feel like a janitor anymore. He felt like someone who mattered.